You ever notice how every generation has that one miracle cure everyone swears by? Today it's essential oils, diet gummies, and that cousin who insists celery juice will fix your childhood trauma. But the Romans outdid all of us. They had one answer to everything. Wine. Headache? Wine. Heartbreak? Wine. Got stabbed? More wine. Basically, if Google existed in ancient Rome, every search result would just say, "Have you tried wine?" And I know what you're thinking. They couldn't have been that dramatic. Oh, trust me. You think modern influencers exaggerate? Romans would have turned your sniffles into a full-blown Dionysian prescription party. You go in for a sprained ankle, you come out with something that smells like someone squeezed a vineyard through a philosophy degree. Anyway, before I pour this whole thing out, yes, the polite YouTube ritual. If you actually like this bizarre midnight archaeology we're about to do, then fine. Hit the like button. If not, don't. I'm not Rome. I don't need to conquer your thumb. Subscribe only if you enjoy stories that feel like someone reading forbidden history in a candlelit basement. And tell me, where are you watching from? What time is it over there? If it's past midnight, congratulations. You're already in the right mental temperature for ancient medical chaos. So, dim the lights a little more. Pretend the room is an old tavern that smells like smoke and questionable decisions. Maybe turn on a fan so it sounds like ancient Mediterranean wind, or at least like your air conditioner trying its best. Because we're about to slide quietly into tonight's slightly strange journey. A journey into a world where medical school meant, can you pour this without spilling? And where your health insurance was basically a vineyard. Let's drift back, all the way to around the 1st century. Imagine a city so loud it makes your apartment neighbor with the karaoke machine seem like a monk. Rome wasn't quiet. Rome was a full-time festival accidentally mixed with a construction site. Streets buzzing with merchants yelling about olives like it's the stock market. Soldiers clanking, horses having emotional breakdowns in the background. Heat rising from stone buildings, smelling of bread, sweat, incense, and that one public bath that everyone pretends is optional but really isn't. Inside this world walked the Roman doctor, or, well, someone claiming to be a doctor. Some were brilliant. Some were basically ancient consultants, very confident, rarely correct, highly paid. And everywhere they went, wine followed. Not the fancy aged in French oak type. No, this stuff came in flavors like boiled with herbs, mixed with seawater, and occasionally, why is it glowing? But here's the twist. Romans weren't just drinking wine to get pleasantly confused. They used it the way we use disinfectant, painkillers, cough syrup, and emotional support snacks. They genuinely believed wine did everything, warmed the body, balanced the humors, and made life slightly less disappointing. In other words, they were already doing what modern people do with overpriced lattes, just missing the cup holder and the passive-aggressive barista. Now imagine you step into a Roman home. There's a patient lying on a bed that's basically a wooden apology. A doctor leans over, beard trimmed like he knows things, and he's holding a cup of deep red wine. He sniffs it like a sommelier, pretending he's important. Then he says something dramatic, like, "This will soothe your inner heat," when what he really means is, "I have no idea what's going on, but this usually shuts people up." And the funny thing? It worked, at least for them. Wine made pain fuzzier, infections cleaner, and conversations slower. Plus, compared to the water they had, which was basically a liquid dare, wine was a luxury of survival. People drank it because staying sober was more dangerous. Basically, Romans invented the idea that beverages could fix your health. They were influencers before Instagram. Drink this for vitality. Drink this for courage. Drink this because your life expectancy is 35, and you might as well enjoy it. Sound familiar? Yep. We're still doing the same thing, just with energy drinks and protein powders that taste like regret. But the story takes an even stranger turn when you follow it into the hands of the elite medical theorists, the guys who looked at wine and saw a whole universe of healing properties. They wrote big scrolls about which wine cured which problem. Sweet wine for one illness, harsh wine for another, and seawater wine for when life really hates you. It's like the ancient version of those absurd coffee shop menus with 26 versions of the same drink. Imagine a Roman doctor walking into your modern workplace. He sees everyone stressed, squinting at screens, clutching iced coffees like emotional life preservers. He'd nod and say, "Yes, imbalance of humors. You need wine at 10 a.m. And honestly, half the office would agree. They weren't entirely wrong. Wine does disinfect. It does numb pain. And it does make people more tolerable at family gatherings. But the Romans took that tiny truth and blew it up like someone who reads one Wikipedia paragraph and suddenly thinks they're a neurologist. So there they were, entire households lined with jugs of medicinal wine, treating everything from toothaches to melancholy. If Romans had pharmacies, they'd just be vineyards with receipts. And that's where our story begins, swirling quietly like a dark red liquid in a clay cup, hinting that the line between cure and comfort has always been, well, blurred. Maybe intentionally, maybe desperately, maybe hilariously. Now, the night deepens, and this tale stretches its fingers toward stranger corners of Roman life. Because wine as medicine wasn't just a habit, it was an accident, a belief, a cultural addiction, and occasionally a political tool wrapped in grapes. Meanwhile, back in that bustling ancient world, something curious was fermenting long before the Romans even started scribbling recipes for medicinal hangovers. Picture this, a dusty little clinic on a side street in early Rome, long before marble columns and the fancy imperial fanfare. A healer, not yet dignified enough to call himself a doctor, is crouched beside a patient. The patient is moaning dramatically, the kind of performance you'd swear deserved an Oscar if Oscars existed. And our healer? He reaches for wine, not because it was written in some grand medical manual, but because he realized one tiny detail. Wine kept things clean. That's it. That's the spark. The great medical revelation of Rome came from noticing that wine didn't spoil like water. Water in ancient Rome was like that co-worker who swears they're reliable, but somehow always ruins everything at the last second. You drink it, you roll the dice. But wine? Wine was stable, predictable, your safe but questionable friend who at least shows up on time to help you move apartments. So, imagine our healer pouring wine onto a wound, and the patient actually stops screaming. And suddenly it clicks. Ah, this is powerful stuff. This fixes things. This is basically magic. And just like that, wine went from pleasant evening activity to universal medical solution. An entire civilization built a healthcare system off what began as a lucky accident. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if one day we find out modern medicine started because someone tripped and fell onto a healing herb. As time passed, this simple trick spread. The wealthy gossiped about it in bathhouses. Soldiers passed the knowledge along with their battle scars. Housewives used it more aggressively than today's mums use essential oils on Facebook. Wine was becoming the cool kid, the trending health hack. And every time it seemed to help, the legend grew. It was like watching misinformation go viral on ancient Twitter, except with more togas and fewer bots. But the story edges into something darker when power steps in. Because Rome didn't become Rome by letting good ideas circulate freely. No, the elites grabbed wine like it was a PR opportunity. The priests and the politicians started shaping the narrative. Wine wasn't just useful, it was blessed. Gift of the gods. A divine tool. And once you attach holy branding to something, humans lose their minds. Suddenly, every ailment needed not just any wine, but the right wine. the one grown in that sacred valley, blessed by that temple, or taxed conveniently by that senator's cousin. Picture a temple courtyard, the air buzzing with chanting. A priest holds up a cup of wine, the light catching it like a mysterious ruby. People gather, desperate for cures they don't have the vocabulary to understand. And the priest says something soothing like, "The gods have infused this with healing." Meanwhile, he knows full well that the vineyard is owned by the temple, its ancient marketing at its finest. Rome invented influencer culture before ring lights were even possible. It would almost be funny if it weren't so tragically familiar. Replace the temple with a wellness brand, the priest with a lifestyle guru, and the crowd with people who spend $50 on chlorophyll drops. Same energy. But out there in the streets, ordinary Romans took the idea and sprinted with it. They turned wine treatments into daily rituals. Sore throat? Warm wine. Digestive problem? Spiced wine. Feeling sad? Honeyed wine. Feeling too happy? Also wine. Balance is everything. It became their emotional duct tape, a liquid bandage for the body and the soul. And let's not pretend we're above it. We open TikTok, see someone telling us lemon water will reset our entire internal universe, and for a moment we believe. Humans haven't changed. We've just updated the packaging. Now, sink deeper into this picture. A small Roman tavern, the kind with wooden tables worn down by elbows full of stories. A middle-aged man limps in, complaining dramatically about his joints, because joint pain transcends time. The tavern keeper wipes a cup with a cloth that probably shouldn't be used to wipe anything, pours him a warm drink, adds some herbs he found somewhere, and declares it medicinal. And the man believes him, drinks it like salvation. And for a moment, maybe it helps. Maybe the warmth numbs the ache. Maybe belief itself does the heavy lifting. That's when you realize something almost poetic. Romans weren't treating illnesses. They were treating fear. The fear of pain, of uncertainty, of not knowing what their bodies were doing. And wine, conveniently, softened fear faster than any priest's sermon. You can almost see the smirk on history's face. But this soothing liquid miracle wouldn't stay peaceful for long. As Rome expanded, armies marching, borders shifting, their medical wine gospel marched with them. Soldiers carried jugs not just for drinking, but for cleaning wounds in distant lands. And the locals they encountered? They watched, they tasted, and sometimes they doubted everything. Imagine trying to explain to a Germanic tribesman that this red liquid was meant to heal, not intoxicate. He probably stared silently, wondering if Romans were simply very enthusiastic about excuses to drink. Rome didn't just export wine, they exported belief. And belief, as always, was contagious. And now that we've traced it from accident to empire, this whole thing is starting to look less like medicine and more like a civilization collectively self-medicating its anxieties. Sort of like how we pretend coffee fixes our personality disorders. But don't get too comfortable. The story's going to tilt again soon, into stranger remedies, stranger logic, and even stranger people who swore by their wine-charged science. Do you want me to continue with the next part? Good. Let's keep wandering through this dim little alley, where medicine and intoxication blur like bad decisions at 2 a.m. But the story slips sideways here, into the homes of people who weren't doctors, weren't priests, weren't even pretending to be knowledgeable. Just everyday Romans trying to survive a world where plagues showed up more often than your landlord's rent reminders. Picture a tiny apartment in the Subura, Rome's chaotic neighborhood, kind of like if you stuffed 10,000 people into a building designed for 2 and added a whole lot of shouting. The walls shake. The air smells like fish sauce and ambition, and there's a family huddled around a clay jug like it's their last hope. Someone coughs. Not a polite cough, but the kind that makes everyone else instinctively take 3 steps back. And instead of panic, the mother grabs the jug, pours wine into a chipped cup, squeezes in a little honey, mutters a blessing she half remembers, and hands it over with full confidence. This is her medicine cabinet. This is her pharmacy. This is ancient WebMD. Except you don't end up convinced you're dying in 5 minutes. Their whole neighborhood runs on this logic. You don't have clean water? Wine. You don't have stable food? Wine. You don't have emotional boundaries? Also wine. People depended on it so deeply that it woven itself into their identity. It wasn't a drink. It was comfort in liquid form. A warm, heavy blanket when the world felt sharp. And honestly, you can't blame them. When streets flood with sewage every time it rains, you start trusting anything that doesn't kill you on the spot. Fast forward a bit, not in real history, just in your imagination, and you're walking through a Roman marketplace at dawn. Bakers yelling, vendors shoving, someone selling amulets guaranteed to repel evil spirits and disappointing lovers. A toothache merchant screams from the corner about his new miracle cure, wine boiled with roses. A guy to your left insists wine mixed with pepper will clear your sinuses. Another says wine with salt will cure your hangover, which is hilarious because in Rome you drink wine to fix the hangover wine caused. It's a self-sustaining ecosystem, like corporate workflows that only exist to fix problems created by other workflows. Humanity's favorite loop. Now, maybe you want to step a little closer. Let me slip you into the scene yourself. Imagine you're there, fully. You wake up in a tiny Roman room with sunlight stabbing through the window like an uninvited tax collector. Your bed is a lumpy straw mattress, your back already protesting. Outside, someone is yelling about fresh olives like they're announcing the apocalypse. You stumble toward a wooden basin, splash water on your face. Pray it doesn't infect you with something creative. Then your stomach aches. Maybe bad bread, maybe stress, maybe the existential dread of living in the center of an empire built on questionable plumbing. What do? You reach for the jug. Because everyone does. Even the jug looks exhausted. Clay chipped, handle cracked, smelling like a mixture of grapes and survival. You take a sip. It burns lightly, settles warmly, and for a moment your problems feel smaller. Not solved, just softened. And congratulations. You've just participated in ancient self-care. No scented candles, no skincare routine. Just fermented grapes and the quiet hope that you won't die before lunch. And no, HR back then won't help you. They don't exist yet. They won't for a long time. You're on your own, with wine. But not all Romans drank mindlessly. Some people studied wine, analyzed it, worshipped it like a mysterious puzzle, and none did that better, or stranger, than the doctor whose name echoes through medical history more loudly than he probably deserves, Galen. Before we follow him, let me set the stage. Imagine a smug genius, the kind of co-worker who reads one long article and suddenly corrects everyone in meetings. Galen was that, but multiplied by 10 and wrapped in a toga. He didn't invent wine medicine, but he perfected it, categorized it, gave it a personality. To him, wine wasn't just wine. It had temperaments. Some wines were hot, some cold, some dry, some wet, all according to a system so complicated it makes astrology look like kindergarten doodles. He wrote pages, about which wine should treat fever, which should treat swelling, which should clean wounds, which should make digestion less dramatic. If a patient sneezed unexpectedly, Galen probably had a vintage recommendation. And imagine this man walking around Rome with the confidence of someone who knows that everyone else is too confused to challenge him. His medical practice was basically a sommelier with a god complex. Picture him at a bedside. The patient is pale, sweating, shaking. Galen nods, strokes his beard like a villain planning something elaborate, and says, "This man requires wine, but not that wine. No, the one from Crete, the dry one, with notes of herbs and subtle arrogance. The assistants scramble. The family frets. Galen maintains theatrical eye contact with the ceiling. And when the patient inevitably feels slightly better, simply because someone gave him warm alcohol, Galen takes full credit. Ancient medicine was 20% treatment, 80% confidence performance. But the funny, or tragic, part? People believed him. They needed to. In a world where disease could appear out of nowhere and death traveled faster than gossip, certainty was intoxicating. Galen offered certainty wrapped in grape juice, and his influence spread across generations, across borders, across centuries. The Middle Ages devoured his ideas like hungry interns devour free office snacks. For over 1,000 years, Europe kept prescribing wine for everything, just because Galen said so. Talk about job security. So here we are, drifting through a world where a single drink became healer, ritual, comfort, disinfectant, placebo, and emotional support animal. And just when you think it can't get any stranger, oh, trust me, the story still has places to go. Because the Romans didn't stop at drinking wine. They cooked with it, bathed in it, soaked bandages in it, even shoved it into body parts that I'm not going to describe in detail because you might be eating right now. And all of it was done with complete seriousness. The kind of seriousness people today reserve for cryptocurrency predictions. But let's not rush. There's another corner of this story waiting, where wine becomes political, moral, even dangerous. All right. Sink a little deeper into the dark room hush. Let the world outside fade like a half-forgotten notification. We're stepping into a Rome where wine didn't just soothe wounds. It stirred ambition, whispered power, and occasionally started problems no one was emotionally prepared for. Somewhere in the marble heartbeat of the empire, a senator sits in his villa, swirling a cup of deep red wine like he's contemplating the meaning of life, when in reality he's just trying to ignore the fact that his nephew accidentally insulted a general at dinner last night. Politics in Rome was basically a full-time reality show with more stabbing. And wine, oh wine, sat right in the middle of it all. See, once everyone believed wine healed the body, the powerful got creative. They decided it healed society too. Suddenly, offering someone wine wasn't just hospitality. It was politics. It was networking. It was, look how generous I am, wrapped in an intoxicating grape-scented handshake. Imagine a high-ranking politician throwing a banquet, the kind with mosaic floors, gold plates, musicians desperately trying to play over guests who keep telling the same stories. And near the entrance, a physician hired specifically to explain which rare wines were medicinal and therefore absolutely necessary for the evening. It's like hiring a nutritionist to justify why the dessert table is taller than a small temple. The elites threw around phrases like healing properties, vitalizing heat, and good for the humors. But really, they just wanted an excuse to drink more than the peasants. It's the ancient equivalent of someone calling their $18 green smoothie a wellness investment. But this wasn't just luxury, it was propaganda. The message was clear. Those in power had access to the best medicine because they were the protectors of Rome. And if the best medicine happened to taste delicious and make people more agreeable during political negotiation, well, convenient. Meanwhile, the religious institutions were not about to let politicians monopolize the wine spotlight. Temples claimed their own versions of sacred wine, each with rituals so elaborate you'd think healing required choreography. Priests muttered incantations, poured wine over altars, sang hymns, and then encouraged people to take home blessed jugs for health. And no, these jugs were not free. Ancient spirituality has always had a receipt. Some cults went further. They believed wine connected mortals to divine realms. The god Bacchus wasn't just about drunken revelry. He was a spiritual therapist. The wine rituals surrounding him promised catharsis, clarity, release. People joined these rites to cure illnesses physicians couldn't diagnose, which in Rome was basically anything beyond "you're bleeding" or "you fell off something." Imagine nighttime gatherings in the woods, torches flickering, drums thumping, followers drinking wine until they felt the boundaries of their bodies dissolve. Was it healing? Was it escapism? Was it an early prototype of a music festival? Hard to tell. Yet out in the wider empire, not everyone was thrilled. As Romans marched across conquered lands, they brought their wine medicine doctrine with them. Some regions embraced it joyfully. "You're telling me this drink cures headaches and makes my relatives more tolerable? Perfect." Others, though, had very different reactions. Take a moment to picture a small village somewhere in northern Europe. Mist curling through the trees, homes built from wood rather than marble. The locals watch a Roman doctor approach with a clay jug like he's a traveling magician. He explains that this liquid purifies wounds. The villagers exchange glances like, "Okay, sure, but our healer uses moss and prayers. Why should we trust your grape potion?" To them, wine was foreign, suspicious, soft. Romans looked like people who solved all their problems by soaking them in alcohol, which, to be fair, wasn't entirely wrong. This cultural clash led to some awkward moments. There were accusations of witchcraft, of foreign corruption, of trying to weaken warriors by making them too relaxed. Some tribes believed wine made the mind dull, and therefore Romans were secretly trying to sabotage them. Imagine telling a Viking, "Drink this, it's good for your humors," and watching him wonder if you're trying to steal his axe. But even resistance couldn't stop the spread, because wine wasn't just tasty, it was survivable. Water in many regions was just as unreliable as Rome's. Once people realized that wine didn't rot their insides the way a suspicious well might, they began to trust it. Slowly, suspiciously, then enthusiastically. Back in Rome, though, things were getting complicated. The more people believed in wine's medical magic, the more they tried to improve it. They started flavoring it, aging it, mixing it with herbs, sometimes boiling it, sometimes burning it, sometimes turning it into weird, sticky concoctions that probably tasted like disappointment sprinkled with optimism. Recipes multiplied. Manuals spread. Households competed over whose wine cure worked fastest. And in the middle of this sticky, aromatic chaos, there were the quacks. The ones who saw profit in desperation. Street healers sold miracle wine elixirs, guaranteed to fix eyesight, restore youth, bring good luck, fix your marriage, make your neighbor stop borrowing your tools, you name it. There was no FDA, just vibes. Imagine infomercials echoing through ancient streets. Are you tired of living with chronic back pain? Try Dr. Augustus's miracle wine, now with extra herbs probably picked yesterday. You have to admire the creativity, or fear it. But nothing rallied belief like crisis, and Rome had many. Plagues swept through the city like uninvited party guests who refused to leave. Every time disease struck, wine prescriptions skyrocketed. Doctors ordered stronger wines. Temples prepared blessed ones. Families hoarded whatever they could find. It was medical chaos mixed with ancient panic. In these moments, public trust wobbled. Some blamed the gods, some blamed foreigners, some blamed bad stars, and some, in true human fashion, blamed the wine. Maybe it's cursed. Maybe we're drinking too much. Maybe the physicians lied. You could feel the edges of doubt pulling apart the fabric of their belief system. And yet they kept drinking. Because fear is loud, but habits are louder. Somewhere in all this, the Roman idea of wine as medicine evolved into something more instinctive, a cultural reflex, a way to soothe the ache of living in an empire where everything could crumble without warning. Wine wasn't just healing, it was reassurance. The empire felt huge, chaotic, unstoppable. But inside a cup of wine, life felt small, warm, manageable, contained. And that's where things get interesting. Because when you follow wine's journey from temples to senators to taverns to sickbeds, you start realizing Rome wasn't obsessed with wine. Rome was obsessed with control. Control of sickness, of fear, of narratives, of people. But the story isn't finished yet. There are still stranger remedies, darker beliefs, and one or two people who truly went overboard in ways that would make even Galen raise an eyebrow. Good. Stay with me in the quiet. Rome is about to get even stranger, because whenever people believe too hard in one cure, things inevitably spiral. And the Romans? They didn't spiral gently. They catapulted. Somewhere in the middle of the empire's long, wine-stained obsession, we find a rather dramatic shift. Doctors began treating wine not as a drink, but as a toolbox. Every variation, sweet, sour, aged, boiled, infused, did something different. It was like watching someone insist their 20 identical scented candles each have a unique emotional purpose. You and I both know they don't, but try telling that to someone emotionally attached to lavender. So now imagine a Roman physician pacing around his study like he's about to perform a ritual. Scrolls scattered everywhere, ink stains on his hands, the faint smell of herbs and desperation in the air. On the table sits a row of wine jugs, each labeled meticulously. Warming, cooling, drying, loosening, tightening. At this point, they're not even treating medical issues. They're treating verbs. Every patient who walked in basically played medicinal roulette. Fever? Maybe you need wine boiled with celery seeds. Stomach problems? Try wine thickened with resin until it becomes what can only be described as ancient glue. Anxiety? Wine warmed with cinnamon, because nothing calms existential dread like a seasonal scent. The wild part? People trusted this. Completely. Doctors weren't just healers. They were performers. Their confidence mattered more than their accuracy. You could be bleeding from the forehead, and they'd say, "Ah, you see, your humors are overheated. You require a cooling wine." And you'd nod like, "Yes, doctor, absolutely, this explains everything." Because challenging authority was both terrifying and pointless, just like office meetings now. Office. But if you want to see the peak of Roman wine medicine insanity, let's talk about the battlefield. Picture a soldier. Dusty, exhausted, smelling like metal and regret, collapsing after a long skirmish. His wound is deep, ugly, definitely not something a liquid hobby should fix. A medic runs up, tears open a jug of wine, and pours it straight into the wound. The soldier screams, because of course he does. And the medic says, "Good. That means it's working. That's ancient healthcare for you. Pain equals success." If a Roman doctor didn't make you question your will to live, he wasn't doing his job. But wine on the battlefield wasn't just for cleaning wounds. Soldiers drank it constantly. Water supplies were unreliable. Infection spread fast, and morale dipped faster. Wine kept them moving, numbed their aches, helped them sleep, or at least pass out in a way that resembled sleep. You can almost see the exhaustion in their faces. Not the heroic, cinematic kind. The kind where they're clearly thinking, "I did not sign up for this. I just wanted a steady paycheck and maybe some property." And here's the twist. Commanders encouraged it. Not because it made soldiers healthy, but because it made them obedient. Wine softened fear. A tipsy army was easier to motivate, easier to command, easier to send into places sane people would avoid. Rome used wine the way modern companies use office perks, a subtle way to keep everyone too comfortable or too numb to complain. But let's wander out of the military for a moment and into the small, everyday rituals that made wine feel like a household deity. Somewhere in a modest Roman home, a grandmother dips cloth into wine infused with rue, thyme, or rosemary. She presses it onto her grandchild's forehead, whispering a lullaby. The child relaxes. The fever doesn't break yet, but the warmth, the scent, the attention, it brings comfort. You can feel the tenderness in the room. You can feel the fear, too. This isn't a world with hospitals. This is a world where you fight illness with flavor and hope. It's strangely beautiful, and also deeply questionable. Now, let's swing to another part of town. One of those grand villas with marble columns and servants darting around like overstressed interns. The master of the house sits in a luxurious bath filled with, yes, wine. Because someone convinced him that soaking in wine would heal his rheumatism, restore his vigor, maybe even improve his appeal at social gatherings. He emerges purple-tinted, smelling like a festival, convinced he's healthier. Meanwhile, his servants are giggling outside because he looks like a grape that achieved sentience. This was Rome, a place where a substance meant for drinking was suddenly expected to heal from the inside. Outside. Sideways. Wherever you needed it. If Romans had invented skincare routines, they'd involve wine, ash, olive oil, and a prayer that smells faintly of disappointment. But here's where things twist again, into one of the strangest, most unintentionally comedic beliefs of the era. The Romans thought wine could diagnose your health. Yes, really. Picture a doctor leaning over a cup of your urine, mixing it with wine, swirling it around like he's judging the aroma. If the mixture reacted in some specific way, color, texture, bubbles, he'd declare a diagnosis. It's like a sommelier auditioning as a lab technician. If the wine stayed clear, your kidneys were happy. If it clouded, something was wrong. It's bizarre. It's unscientific. And yet, it's also kind of impressive how committed they were to this grape-based science experiment. Imagine doing this today. Going to your doctor, standing awkwardly in a cold room in a paper gown. And they come in holding 2 glasses like it's a tasting flight. Ah yes, this vintage pairs beautifully with your kidney stones. Great. Thank you, doctor. Truly comforting. But all of this, the baths, the rituals, the battlefield wine bombs, the diagnostic cocktail hour, it points to something deeper. Romans didn't just use wine because it worked. They used it because it made the world feel less terrifying. When medicine is uncertain, you cling to whatever seems consistent. When life is chaotic, you hold on to anything that brings routine. And when your civilization stretches so far that you can't even conceptualize its edges, you look for something intimate, dependable, familiar. Wine was Rome's comfort blanket, their emotional airbag, their coping mechanism dressed up as expertise. And now the story edges toward a darker insight. Because the more Rome relied on wine, the more blind they became to its limits, to its dangers, to its illusions. They built a medical worldview on a foundation that was never stable. And that belief shaped Europe for centuries, echoing through medieval hospitals, monasteries, plague remedies, household traditions. But don't step away yet. We're getting closer to the point where the whole system begins to wobble, where the cracks show, and the truth about why humans cling to miracle cures starts glowing in the shadows. Good. Take one more slow breath. Let the room stay dim. We're drifting now into the part of the tale where the Romans begin to believe their own myth a little too hard. And things start sliding from charmingly misguided into, oh no, sweetie, absolutely not. Imagine the city again, Rome, late at night. The torches flicker along the streets, shadows stretching across stone like long fingers. The noise has finally settled, leaving behind a soft hum of distant conversation and the occasional donkey that sounds like it's having an existential breakdown. And somewhere, in a wealthy home overlooking the forum, a physician sits at a polished table, writing by lamplight. His quill scratches across parchment, quick, confident, a little dramatic, because you know he thinks this scroll will be quoted for centuries. He's writing new instructions on wine therapy, stronger doses, stranger mixtures, higher stakes. Because the empire is changing. Diseases are changing. Expectations are changing. And nothing terrifies a confident man more than realizing his trick might not work forever. This is when Roman medicine starts bending under pressure. Doctors begin prescribing wine for illnesses that don't respond, fevers that rage anyway, plagues that laugh in the face of grape-flavored optimism. And every failure pushes them deeper into creativity, or madness. But from the outside, it all looks authoritative. That's the thing about ancient medicine. As long as you sound confident, no one knows you're making half of it up. Kind of like when someone says they optimize workflows for a living. So now you get treatments like wine mixed with crushed pearls, wine with burned goat horns reduced to ash, wine boiled down until it's so thick it could patch a roof. At this point, the doctor isn't healing you, he's seasoning you. And patients go along with it because, well, what's the alternative? Rome's medical system is essentially believe or be afraid, and fear wins almost every time. Meanwhile, a very different group is also leaning into wine medicine, the philosophers. Oh yes, the men who spent hours debating reality while contributing absolutely nothing to anyone's practical survival. These guys claimed wine clarified the mind, sharpened thought, helped them reason, reflect, transcend. Which is adorable, considering they also wrote entire essays about how sneezing was a sign from the gods. Picture one of them, drapey toga, beard long enough to hide snacks in, pacing beneath a column. He sips wine and claims it unlocks truth. Meanwhile, his slave boy in the corner is thinking, "Sir, you are not unlocking truth, you are unlocking emotional drama." But this philosophical endorsement cemented wine's status even further. When thinkers, priests, politicians, and doctors all agree on something, well, society starts building castles on assumptions, or in Rome's case, aqueducts powered by optimism. And now the story veers into one of its more fascinating, uncomfortable corners, the morality of wine. Because while most Romans were happy to drink as instructed, a few groups pushed back. Hard. Let me take you to a quiet Roman courtyard at dawn. Marble cool under your feet, fountains trickling softly. A small community gathers. Ascetics, early moralists, people who wake up at sunrise on purpose and probably judge everyone else. They whisper that wine weakens virtue, clouds judgment, leads the body into temptation. Honestly, the body didn't need much help. These people argued that a doctor prescribing wine wasn't healing you, he was corrupting you. They wrote warnings, they organized meetings, they dramatically claimed the empire was losing its discipline through the cup. And the government did what governments always do when someone criticizes the national lifestyle, ignored them completely. But their protests left a crack in the belief system, a question in the air. If wine is so medicinal, why does it also cause so many incidents? Because Romans weren't exactly graceful drinkers. Festivities often ended with broken pottery, bruised egos, and someone swearing they'd never mix spiced wine with heated wine again. Public drunkenness wasn't rare. It was practically a community sport. And every embarrassing story undermined the idea that this liquid was divine medicine. Let's drift to a public bath, steam rising around marble pillars, voices echoing. Two men argue passionately. One insists his doctor told him to drink double to strengthen his internal heat. The other says his doctor ordered him to dilute wine because his humors were too damp. They splash water, slap each other's shoulders, claim superior medical advice, and eventually wander off to drink more. A group of older men nearby roll their eyes with the same energy of office veterans listening to interns debate productivity hacks. Even slaves, the people with the least power in society, understood the absurdity. Many of them secretly watered down their master's wine, both to make it last longer and to prevent household disasters. They whispered jokes about doctors prescribing wine so often simply because they could charge more for it. Cynicism is universal. Time doesn't change that. But the true breaking point, the moment wine medicine begins to reveal its cracks, comes with plague. Not one plague, many. Picture the city trembling with fear. Bodies carried out, fires burning to purify the air, people collapsing in markets. No amount of wine can stop it. The doctors, so proud, so theatrical, start to falter. They try boiling wine longer, mixing in stronger herbs, praying louder, but nothing works. You can almost hear the panic beneath the surface. The people trusted wine to protect them, and suddenly wine feels powerless. The illusion fractures. Some citizens blame the doctors, some blame the gods, some even blame the wine, claiming it was too weak, too corrupted, too impure for the crisis. This is the first time Rome faces a truth we still struggle with today. A miracle cure only works for as long as reality cooperates. Yet even in collapse, wine held on. Because when the world breaks, humans cling harder to whatever they understand. And wine, sweet, warm, numbing, still made them feel less alone. Still, something subtle shifted. A doubt. A whisper. A hairline fracture that would eventually grow into cracks running across centuries of inherited belief. Rome didn't stop using wine as medicine, but the confidence changed. The swagger softened. Doubt snuck in like a shadow slipping across a stone floor. And just when you think the decline will be slow, steady, quiet, Rome surprises you again, because this empire rarely dies politely. Wine medicine begins crossing borders, mutating, twisting into medieval cures, alchemical experiments, monastic remedies, shaping the very foundations of European healthcare for 1,000 years. But before we step into that long echo, there's one last Roman scene we need to visit, one that reveals exactly why wine medicine survived, even when it failed. Good, let's keep drifting, like we're following a thin line of candlelight into the last chambers of Rome's wine-soaked imagination. Things are about to get personal, a little eerie, and weirdly relatable in the way ancient disasters always are. Somewhere in the city's quieter outskirts, far from the senators, far from the crowded baths, far from the philosophers combing their beards like they're detangling their thoughts, there is a modest home where a man is dying. Not dramatically, not poetically, just slowly, the way people do when medicine is more hopeful than helpful. His family hovers around him. The house is dim, the air heavy with incense that's supposed to purify but mostly just makes everyone choke a little. And on the table beside him sits a cup of wine, dark, dense, infused with herbs a neighbor recommended. The scent is sharp, almost metallic. The doctor, who looks like he hasn't slept since Julius Caesar was relevant, takes the cup, lifts it to the man's lips, and whispers something comforting. He doesn't know if this will help. He hopes it will at least ease the pain. Everyone in the room leans closer, clinging to the ritual. The sip is small, weak, but it matters. You can feel the desperation, the devotion, the way families, then and now, will reach for anything when a loved one slips away. And in that moment, that tiny silence between breath and belief, you finally understand why wine medicine survived. It wasn't because it worked, it was because it felt gentle. Wine didn't feel like a blade, or a cauterizing iron, or a desperate prayer shouted at an indifferent god. Wine felt human, warm, familiar. It tasted like life continuing, even when illness threatened to end it. When nothing else soothed, wine soothed. When nothing else distracted, wine distracted. When nothing else comforted, wine comforted. Rome didn't cling to wine because it cured. Rome clung to wine because it softened reality. And humans, no matter the century, will always choose a soft story over a sharp truth. But let's pull away from that room for now. like we're drifting backward through time's hallway, because the broader world was still moving, still changing, still fermenting, pun intended, under the empire's weight. Rome wasn't just feeding wine to its sick. It was feeding wine into law, morality, and diplomacy. And somewhere in the midst of that complicated blend, one more absurd chapter unfolded. Imagine a legal dispute in a crowded forum. A man is being accused of poisoning his neighbor. Everyone screams, gestures wildly, points fingers like they're auditioning for a soap opera. And what does the defense present? A cup. A literal cup of wine. This, he claims, is proof. My client only gave him medicinal wine. Medieval lawyers didn't invent ridiculous courtroom theatrics. They inherited them. And judges, gods bless their tired souls, had to sit there pretending this argument made sense. They had to decide whether someone intended healing or harm based on whether the drink had herbs, or too many herbs, or herbs from the wrong region, or herbs that looked suspiciously like the ingredients of an actual poison. Wine blurred the line between good intention and malicious creativity. The law struggled because wine was both medicine and danger, much like emails today, useful until someone weaponizes them. But while courts tangled themselves into grape-flavored knots, the military pushed wine culture into even stranger territory. Not only did soldiers drink it, clean wounds with it, and trade it like currency, they smuggled it. Entire supply chains emerged, full of shady merchants who claimed their wine cured wounds 3 times faster than normal wine. Absolutely no evidence, just vibes and a label. Rome invented medical marketing. Of course it did. And when troops stationed in cold, foreign regions ran out of proper wine, they improvised. They fermented whatever they could find, berries, grains, honey, and called it wine anyway because the term had ballooned into meaning anything that won't immediately kill you and might cheer you up. The definition was generous. Hope tends to be. But the real twist comes when conquered peoples began blending Roman wine lore with their own traditions. Egyptian healers mixed wine with desert herbs. Gauls added tree bark, don't ask. Greeks infused it with medicines we'd actually consider useful today. Each culture tweaked the recipe, which meant that by the time Rome fell, wine medicine had mutated into dozens of regional micro-beliefs. Little grape-flavored viruses of tradition carried by soldiers, merchants, and wandering doctors. Now picture a monk in the early medieval period. Hooded, quiet, scribbling in a cold stone room. He copies Galen's writings, carefully preserving every word, even the ridiculous ones, because he believes knowledge must survive. And right beside the text, he adds new notes in the margins. For fever, red wine with sage. For melancholy, warm wine with figs. For sinful thoughts, dilute wine with prayer. The empire is gone, but the doctrine lives, like perfume lingering long after someone leaves the room. And so, gradually, wine shifts from cure to comfort to cultural memory. People stop asking why it's used. They just use it because their parents used it, because priests used it, because doctors used it, because someone somewhere swore it kept their family alive during some dark winter. Wine became inherited wisdom, the kind passed down not through science, but through fear. And fear, like mold on old bread, spreads effortlessly. But now the story edges toward something bigger, something that sits under all of human history like a soft, quiet heartbeat. Because when you follow the trail, from ancient doctors to desperate families to shifting armies to wandering monks, you start to see a pattern. The Romans weren't foolish. They weren't irrational. They were just like us, trying to find comfort in a world that rarely makes sense, trying to feel like they had control over forces bigger than themselves, trying to believe that if they drank the right thing, prayed the right words, followed the right rituals, maybe everything would turn out okay. Wine wasn't medicine. Wine was reassurance, disguised as expertise, and that, ironically, made it one of the strongest medicines they had. But I can feel the story tightening now, pulling us toward a bigger realization, the kind that leaves a faint sting even as you smile at the absurdity. We're close to the heart of the whole thing, the moment when all these threads twist into one uncomfortable truth about humans and the things we cling to. All right, sink back into the dimness. We're entering the stretch where the story gathers itself like a breath before a confession, the part where Rome's wine obsession stops being a quirky historical footnote and starts looking a little too familiar. Think of late Rome, the empire heavy with age, creaking like a great wooden ship that's been patched too many times. The streets are still noisy, the markets still crowded, but there's a tension in the air, a kind of collective unease. People smile, but their eyes flicker toward the horizon, half expecting bad news. It's the mood of a workplace where everyone knows the company's not doing well, but management keeps insisting everything is perfectly under control. In that atmosphere, wine becomes more than a cure. It becomes a ritual of denial. Imagine a Roman doctor visiting a household where a child is sick. The mother hovers close, holding her breath. The father paces. The doctor dips his fingers into a bowl of wine mixed with crushed herbs, sniffs it like he's auditioning for a job as a perfume tester, and declares gravely, "This will draw out the imbalance." He knows it won't. They know he knows, but everyone participates in the performance anyway. That's the thing about rituals. They hold people together even when the truth would tear them apart. Meanwhile, across the city, a very different drama is unfolding. Picture a wealthy matron seated in her atrium, surrounded by servants carrying jugs of different wines like some ancient tasting menu. She isn't sick. She just believes the right blend will keep her youthful. Her favorite recipe includes saffron, wildly expensive. So she tells all her friends it restores the glow of the skin. Her friends believe her because she says it with confidence and a bracelet worth more than their houses. It's ancient wellness culture. If Instagram were invented in Rome, she'd be the one posting stories titled "My Anti-Aging Regimen, Sacred Saffron Wine Edition." But while the wealthy turned wine into a self-care aesthetic, the poor treated it like survival rope. In crowded neighborhoods where smoke choked the air and children cried through the night, a cup of warm wine was the closest thing to peace. You can imagine the moment. A tired father sitting by the window, holding a cup with both hands just to warm them, feeling the day finally loosen its grip. He isn't thinking about Galen or humors or doctors. He's thinking about the tiny space of quiet the drink gives him. And that duality, wine as luxury and wine as necessity, begins to shape Rome in subtle ways. It becomes a unifying thread across social classes. Everyone uses it, though for different reasons. A senator and a laborer have nothing in common except the belief that wine makes life feel more bearable. And maybe, just maybe, that's why it became medicine. Because a cure, in the end, is simply something that makes pain feel less sharp. Now the story takes a stranger turn when the empire begins importing medical ideas from outside. From Greece, from Egypt, from the East. Rome loved acting like it invented everything, but in reality it stole medical theories the way modern corporations steal app features. And when foreign physicians arrived with their herbs, their salves, their complicated theories that actually involved observation, Roman doctors panicked. They doubled down on wine. Picture a Greek physician giving a thoughtful lecture about anatomy, while a Roman doctor sits nearby thinking, "Yes, interesting, but what if we added wine?" Rome wasn't unique in this. Every culture in crisis looks backward, clutching traditions like life vests. Romans weren't ready to give up the one thing that had been their companion since childhood, their battlefield standby, their party fuel, their comfort blanket. But the arrival of new medical knowledge created friction. Some families abandoned wine for foreign remedies. Some blended the methods. Some argued endlessly, turning dinner into heated debates about whether fever required honeyed wine or willow bark. If you think modern family gatherings are chaotic, imagine yours but with half the table reading Galen and the other half quoting Egyptian treatises. Still, wine endured. Even after the empire began cracking, even as corruption rose, even as the economy wobbled, even as invasions rattled city walls, wine remained the one stable offering. Something familiar in a world that stopped feeling familiar. And then, here comes one of the most quietly powerful scenes. Imagine a Roman doctor realizing fully, deeply, painfully, that his wine cures aren't enough. He's treating a group of patients during an outbreak. He does everything he was taught. Diluted wine, strong wine, wine with wormwood, wine with frankincense, wine heated to a boil, wine cooled in marble basins. Nothing works. People die anyway. He washes his hands, with wine, of course, and sits down heavily on a stool. His shoulders slump. You can almost hear his breath shudder. He isn't a fraud. He isn't cruel. He's just a man who inherited a system that was never built to withstand a world this unpredictable. The weight of that moment lingers. But instead of abandoning wine, he adds new notes to his curls. Not corrections, additions. Because he can't let go of the foundation, even when it cracks. It's too deeply tied to his identity, his profession, his place in society. And that right there is where the entire story begins to illuminate something uncomfortable about us, about humans in every century. We don't cling to miracle cures because they work. We cling to them because they give us narrative, because they help us pretend chaos has rules, because the alternative is admitting we don't know as much as we think we do. Wine was Rome's answer to uncertainty. Today we have different answers, but the impulse is identical. Scroll through social media and you'll see modern versions of the same belief. Drink this to heal your gut. Drink that to fix your mood. Put this in your smoothie and watch all your problems dissolve. It's adorable. It's tragic. It's human. Ancient Romans weren't backward. They were just early adopters of coping. And this realization pulls us into the final arc of the story. How wine medicine survived the fall of the empire and slipped, quietly, into the bloodstream of medieval Europe, reshaping cures, rituals, and beliefs for centuries. Good. Lean in a little closer. We're crossing the empire's threshold now, stepping into the long twilight after Rome's grandeur dimmed. But wine didn't dim with it. It traveled, multiplied, mutated, survived. And the way it survived says more about people, about us, than about vineyards or ancient doctors. Picture Rome's last decades. Political chaos simmering like a pot someone forgot on the stove. Barbarians at the borders. Inflation twisting coinage into jokes. And the city's once bright streets looking a little tired. Yet even here, even now, if you walked into a household at dusk, you'd see the same ritual. Someone pouring wine into a cup and murmuring that it will help with aches, chills, sadness, frustration, life. Wine didn't collapse with Rome. It seeped into the cracks, went underground, hid in monasteries and memories. When the empire splintered, physicians scattered. Some fled to safer territories. Some were absorbed into new kingdoms. Some took their knowledge, their scrolls, their mixtures, their grape-stained wisdom, and handed it to the only stable institutions left, monasteries. Now imagine a monastery in early medieval Europe. Quiet, cold, thick stone walls that keep secrets better than people can. Monks shuffle through dim halls carrying candles that drip wax like they're tired of existing. One monk, thin, serious, slightly hunched from a lifetime of bending over manuscripts, sits in a small scriptorium. He opens a scroll from centuries earlier, written in elegant Latin. Galen. He studies it, nodding slowly, reverently, as if the text were holy. Because in a world where plague, famine, and invasion can erase entire villages, old knowledge becomes sacred. And Galen? Galen wrote like he expected to be immortal, so the monk copies his remedies. Every detail, every wine mixture, every instruction. He doesn't question it. Who is he to question an ancient authority? In a world rebuilding from ruins, the past feels safer than the present. You can almost smell the ink and dust as he writes, for fever, wine with sage. For gout, wine with rosemary. For melancholy, wine warmed gently with honey. When he finishes, he adds his own notes. Little adjustments based on local herbs, local resources, local superstition. And suddenly, wine medicine has a new branch in its family tree. Some monks become full-time healers. They gather herbs in quiet gardens, dry them on wooden racks, and store them in labeled jars. They tend vineyards too. Not for pleasure, but because wine is essential for their medical practice. Imagine a monk in a garden at dawn, plucking sage leaves and whispering prayers, then wandering to the vineyard to check the ripeness of grapes he believes hold life-saving properties. Wine becomes monastic medicine, sacred, clean, protected. Fast forward a bit. You're in a medieval village now. A child falls ill. The family rushes to the monastery. A monk examines him with the calm, unbothered energy of someone who's seen the apocalypse 3 times already. He prepares a cup of warm wine, stirs in herbs, and gives it to the child. The parents watch, whispering hopes like fragile glass. Even if it doesn't cure, it calms. Even if it doesn't heal, it comforts. This is how Roman wine survives, quietly, softly, gently, through emotion more than logic. And then the belief spreads beyond monasteries, into folk medicine. Picture a medieval cottage with a smoky hearth and low wooden beams. A grandmother stirs wine with cinnamon and cloves, telling her grandchildren it will keep the winter ghosts away. She doesn't mean literal ghosts. She means pneumonia, chills, the things that snatch children suddenly, silently. But metaphors help people cope. Nearby, a blacksmith drinks warm wine before bed to soothe aching joints. A young woman sips wine with mint after heartache. A traveling merchant drinks strong spiced wine every morning to wake the blood. These people aren't quoting Galen. They're quoting their neighbors, their parents, their memories. The belief is now cultural, not clinical. Wine becomes a medical vernacular, a shared language of healing that no one questions because everyone breathes it. But travel south to Islamic medical centers in the medieval world, and you'll see something fascinating. Scholars there preserve Galen too, translating his work into Arabic. But unlike Europe, they challenge him. They question, debate, test, observe. They update. They correct. Some reject wine entirely for religious reasons. Others use it only externally. Their hospitals, actual hospitals, not monasteries, begin developing more rational medical frameworks. Europe, meanwhile, clings to wine like a security blanket, wrapping it around illnesses that need more than comfort. And this divide grows and echoes and eventually helps shape completely different medical legacies. But let's return to Europe for a moment, because the story turns poetic again. As vineyards spread, as monks refine their techniques, as households perfect their family recipes, wine becomes intertwined with identity. Entire regions proudly declare their wines the strongest, the purest, the most healing. Medieval marketing, still alive and well. One region swears by heavily spiced wine for digestion. Another insists that diluted wine keeps the blood young. Another says white wine cools the body, red wine warms it. People drink specific wines in specific seasons, not because of taste, but because of medicinal doctrine. Imagine a medieval tavern buzzing with chatter. Someone sneezes loudly. Half the room freezes. Then a man stands up and proclaims, "He needs warmed wine with cloves." Another shouts, "No, white wine with lemon is better." A third, "Nonsense, he needs nettle wine boiled with honey." It's the ancient version of people arguing online about whether ginger shots or elderberry syrup prevents colds. And just like Rome, Europe's love affair with wine medicine survives not because it always works, but because it gives people something to hold on to. A ritual, a remedy, a moment of control in an uncontrollable world. Hospitals eventually form, crude at first, then more structured. But even there, wine remains a staple. For cleaning wounds, easing pain, washing surgical tools, and calming the dying. Doctors fight plagues with wine fumigations. Surgeons use wine-soaked bandages. Pharmacists mix wine with everything from aloe to powdered coral to crushed gemstones. And patients? They expect wine. A hospital without wine would feel incomplete, untrustworthy, because the belief by now is centuries old. Older than kingdoms, older than borders, older than many languages. Wine is healing because people want it to be healing. And belief, once reinforced long enough, becomes indistinguishable from truth. But here's where the story begins, pulling toward a grand convergence. The point where ancient comfort meets emerging science. A new world is coming, one with microscopes, fever thermometers, germ theory hiding on the horizon like a revelation waiting to ruin everyone's favorite excuses. Wine won't disappear, but it's about to change roles in a way Rome could never have imagined. Good, settle back. This is the part where history starts tightening like a bowstring. Wine has survived empires, plagues, monks, and grandmothers. But now it's about to collide with something far more terrifying than disease or political collapse. Curiosity. The scientific kind. The kind that ruins comfortable traditions the way bright lights ruin midnight moods. Imagine Europe in the late medieval to early Renaissance era. A place that smells like a mix of incense, wood smoke, unwashed optimism, and the sparks of new ideas. The world is slowly waking from a long intellectual nap, stretching its limbs, blinking at the sunlight of curiosity. People start asking questions they weren't supposed to ask. Like, what if illness isn't caused by demons? Or, what if bleeding a patient actually doesn't fix everything? Bold, dangerous ideas that threaten entire traditions. And right in the middle of this shift sits wine, looking slightly guilty, like someone who knows they exaggerated on their resume. Doctors begin experimenting, not in a clean, modern sense, more like a, let's see what happens if we poke this sense. They open bodies. They question humors. They talk to traveling scholars. And gradually, painfully, reluctantly, they begin discovering things that don't match Galen's grand theories. Imagine a young physician hunched over a table lit by candles, slicing into an animal organ and whispering to himself, "That's definitely not where Galen said it would be." He glances nervously at the door, because contradicting Galen is like telling your boss their entire business model is wrong. Dangerous, career-ending, possibly life-ending. But truth has a way of leaking through cracks, and so slowly medical theory starts shifting. But wine refuses to step aside. Too many people love it. Too many rituals depend on it. Too many doctors rely on it to soothe the pain they still can't cure. Science may be inching forward, but culture stands its ground like an elderly aunt refusing to update her phone. Now picture a bustling medieval apothecary. Shelves stacked with jars labeled in Latin, or something pretending to be Latin. Bundles of herbs hanging like upside-down, featherless birds. And in the center, massive jugs of wine. Apothecaries use wine as a solvent, an antiseptic, a base for syrups, a medium for herbs. They mix it with powdered pearls. Yes, still. Ground amber, dried toads, don't ask. And basically anything they think has a personality. Wine becomes the carrier of medicine, a kind of early pharmaceutical delivery system. It's less, "This wine will heal you," and more, "This wine will help this other thing heal you," once we throw enough ingredients into it to make a witch nervous. But as science grows, so does skepticism. Picture a physician in the 1500s. Fashionable beard, absurdly elaborate hat. The kind of man who quotes Aristotle and feels proud about it. He stands in a lecture hall saying, "The ancients were wise, but perhaps slightly mistaken." Students gasp. A few faint. One guy scribbles furiously in the back like he's preparing the world's most scandalous gossip column. Soon, debates erupt. Should we trust Galen or observation? Should we trust tradition or evidence? Should we keep soaking bandages in wine? Or should we boil them in something less recreational? Wine is still used, heavily. But now people start noticing its limits. That it doesn't stop infection. That it doesn't cure fever. That it doesn't neutralize poison, despite centuries of enthusiastic optimism. And in this new climate of questioning, something astonishing happens. Doctors start cutting wine with water, deliberately. Not because they're worried about overindulgence, but because they want to reduce its intoxicating effects and increase its antiseptic usefulness. Wine slowly shifts from miracle cure to practical tool. It's the medieval equivalent of downgrading someone from CEO of healing to intern in the cleaning department. Still, households cling to old remedies. You can imagine a scene: a woman kneeling by a sick child's bed, pouring warm wine with cinnamon into a cup because her grandmother swore by it. The physician walks in, tries to take the cup, and she pulls it back like he's just grabbed her soul. People trust traditions long after they stop working. It's both sweet and tragic. And yet, even as science grows sharper, the romance of wine medicine refuses to die. Writers and poets keep praising it. Priests keep blessing it. Merchants keep advertising its restorative qualities. People keep drinking it to soothe whatever aches in the body or heart. Now, the world accelerates. Renaissance, enlightenment, new discoveries tumbling in like a landslide. Microscopia, the microscope, appears. Suddenly, people can see tiny organisms swimming in water. Disgusting, yes, but enlightening. Doctors begin to understand infection. They learn that boiling water helps. They learn that sterile tools matter. And they begin noticing that wine doesn't kill everything they once claimed it did. Wine shrinks again, from disinfectant to mild antiseptic. Useful, yes. Divine, no. Imagine being a medieval physician discovering microorganisms for the first time and thinking, "Oh no, I've been prescribing wine baths for decades." The existential crisis must have been intense, and now something inevitable happens. New medicines emerge, real ones, distillations, tinctures, chemical extracts. Alcohol itself, purified far beyond wine, becomes the new go-to disinfectant. Stronger, cleaner, more effective. Wine can't keep up. It's like a once famous actor suddenly competing with a new wave of talent. But here's the twist. Wine doesn't disappear. It simply steps sideways into a new role. Comfort, emotional medicine, social ritual, companion, not healer, but helper. And honestly, that might be the role it always wanted. By the 1800s, doctors still gave wine to patients, not because they believed it cured illness, but because it made suffering less unbearable, a kind of humane sedative, a warm blanket for the terrified. And for surgery before anesthesia, wine remained a last desperate option. Imagine a surgeon telling a patient, "Drink all of this, yes, all, trust me. You don't want to be awake for this." That was medicine before anesthetics. A grim partnership between pain and alcohol. But then, the moment everything changes, modern medicine blooms. Germ theory solidifies. Antiseptics arrive. Anesthetics revolutionize surgery. Painkillers are invented. Scientific research becomes rigorous. Wine finally steps back, exhausted, like an actor bowing after centuries on stage. And yet, people keep using it, not as cure, but as comfort, as ritual, as memory handed down through the bloodline of human habit. A grandmother still tells you to drink warm wine with honey when you're sick. A friend swears red wine helps them sleep. Someone at dinner claims wine digestion wisdom like they've personally consulted Galen. Because while science evolves, belief lingers. And while medicine strengthens, comfort still matters. Now the story tightens one last time, gathering itself for the insight that sits under all these centuries of ritual and reverence. The part that reveals why wine, of all things, stayed with us across millennia. Good? Keep the room dim. Keep the silence soft. We're drifting now toward the heart of this whole tangled history, the part where the past quietly taps us on the shoulder and whispers, "You still do the same things. You've just changed the labels." So imagine you're standing in a quiet room somewhere in the late 19th century. A hospital, pale walls, bright lamps, metal tools laid neatly on a tray. Everything feels clean, sharp, clinical. Not a torch in sight, no incense, no chanting monks. And yet, on the bedside table sits a glass of wine, not as a prescription, not as a medieval cure, but because the doctor knows the patient is scared, and warm alcohol softens the edges of fear in a way sterile science can't. That's the moment the last thread snaps. Wine is no longer medicine, but it refuses to leave the room. It becomes a psychological bandage, a ritual of reassurance, and you can almost hear Rome chuckle across time, like a ghost in the corridor saying, "See? Told you it helps." But while modern medicine is shedding the old myths, regular people, everyday families, workers, travelers, keep passing down their versions of wine healing. Not because they believe Galen's theories, not because monks copied scrolls for centuries, but because traditions feel like anchors in a world that moves too fast. Picture a grandmother somewhere in rural Europe, early 20th century. She has no formal medical training, but she carries generations of whispers inside her. A grandchild coughs. She warms wine with honey and spices. She doesn't think about Rome. She doesn't think about humors. She thinks about what soothed her when she was small and scared. And that, right there, is how ancient beliefs survive. Not through accuracy, not through science, but through emotion. Now, fast forward. Modern day. Hospitals gleam with technology. Doctors carry tablets instead of scrolls. Researchers can map genomes, fight pandemics, isolate viruses, study neural networks. But step outside the hospital, into kitchens, living rooms, restaurants, late-night conversations, and the old whispers are still alive. You've heard them. Red wine is good for the heart. A little wine will help you sleep. Warm wine cures colds. Wine relaxes the nerves. These aren't prescriptions, they're echoes. Echoes of an empire that medicated everything with fermented grapes and confidence. Echoes of soldiers who carried wine in their belts like a survival charm. Echoes of monks who believed wine-made herbs could keep death at bay. Echoes of families who used wine to make sickness feel a little less frightening. We aren't modern, we're just better dressed. But let's shift the camera angle for a moment. Imagine we're not observers anymore. Imagine you wake up one morning in Rome, fully transported. The room is dim, the floor cold, the sounds outside strange and rhythmic. You feel weak, maybe a fever, maybe the aftermath of bad street food. Who knows? And a Roman doctor appears at your bedside. He's confident, unshakably confident, which is suspicious. He presses his fingers to your wrist, counts your pulse with dramatic flair, and nods like he's decoding ancient secrets. Then he prescribes wine. Boiled wine. Spiced wine. Something that smells like mulled despair. You sip it, you grimace. It helps a little, mostly because it distracts you from thinking about your situation. And then comes the punchline, congratulations. You just participated in Rome's entire medical philosophy. And no, HR won't help you. HR hasn't been invented yet. You're stuck with grape-scented solutions until the empire collapses. But here's where this whole story opens into something wider, something that stretches across centuries and settles right into your lap. Because when you pull apart Rome's wine medicine, beneath all the superstition and theatrics and creative mixing, you find one truth. Humans cannot stand uncertainty, so we build rituals around fear, and we call those rituals remedies. Wine wasn't Rome's medicine. It was Rome's comfort language. The empire collapsed, but the comfort stayed. It survived migrations, wars, plagues, renaissances, industrialization. It slipped quietly into our modern culture. It adapted, softened, disguised itself. People still reach for a drink after a long day, still pour a glass before difficult conversations, still use alcohol to smooth reality when life feels too jagged, still believe certain wines bring health, youth, relaxation, even if science says, not exactly. Science fixes bodies. Rituals fix feelings. Wine was always for the feelings. And now that we've walked through 2,000 years of grape-flavored coping, the final insight stands quietly in the corner, waiting for you to notice it. We think we're modern. We think we outgrew superstition. We think we rely on facts. But look closer at your daily habits. The comforting drinks, the routine foods, the little rituals you swear make everything better. You're not so different from a Roman pouring wine into a clay cup and hoping the world will feel softer afterward. And that's the irony glowing at the edge of this story. Our science has evolved, but our anxieties haven't. Our medicine is advanced, but our hearts still want rituals that warm instead of explain. We aren't the futuristic beings we imagine ourselves to be. We're updated versions of the same creatures, chasing comfort in familiar shapes. So the next time you sip something to unwind, to soothe, to steady yourself, remember, you're participating in a tradition that healed more fears than fevers. You're not modern, you're just the updated patch of a medieval person.